don't want to be a statistic. I don't want to be, that after the first year, after the second year, after the third year. But 2.5 years in, I really felt the pressure of that. And I ended up finding myself at a rock bottom in my business. What I was seeing under the surface, under the hood in my business it felt like it was dying.
Welcome to the Soulful CEO Path, the podcast for purpose-driven entrepreneurs who are building wildly abundant and aligned businesses that create ripple effects of positivity in the world. And this show isn't just about cookie-cutter tactics or surface-level strategies. Here we dive into meaningful conversations that empower you to grow as a business owner and as a human. And in today's episode, we're going to be diving into a really interesting conversation around the power of the pivot in entrepreneurship. And to share her wisdom and lived experience around this topic, I'm joined by Emily Neufeld, a career coach specializing in helping women thrive in the tech industry by landing no compromise roles and navigating the job market with confidence, clarity, and purpose. And Emily also knows the power of a pivot firsthand as a full-time entrepreneur of 3 years. So Emily, welcome to the Soulful CEO Path. I'm so looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Yay, me too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. This is really fun because Emily and I have been on her entrepreneurial journey together since the beginning. And Emily, I've been able to see just kind of what has made you successful, in my opinion, and especially when it comes to this concept of the power of the pivot. And one thing I just want to reflect back to you is something that I think you do really well is have this element of grit when it comes to entrepreneurship, but at the same time, having flexibility enough that you're able to pivot and adapt to what you're learning along the way. And to me, that's really what the core of the pivot is all about and why it's so powerful when we can hold those two things available at the same time. So I'd be really curious to hear from your perspective, how do you define the pivot?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that scene in Friends, and I'm not even a super fan, but it's like a meme all over the internet where Ross has the couch with someone else. I don't even know who the other person is, but they're like, pivot, pivot, pivot. Yeah. And I love a good visual. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. And for me, what I think that really speaks to is this intentional change in direction. And sometimes that can happen to us. Layoffs are a big topic in the tech industry, but also they can happen by us. And that's where what I'm really interested in is, even if they happen to us, what can we do to intentionally change and carve a new path? And I'm a bit of a language nerd. And so I pulled up the definition. What does Merriam-Webster have to say about this topic of the pivot? And what I loved that they had highlighted in terms of a definition is an adjustment or modification made in order to adapt or improve. And I think that's so big in my eyes, this idea of adapting, the changes made to adapt or improve.
Oh, I love that. I love that definition and this idea about the conscious change, like the conscious intentional change to adapt and improve. And I just think this conversation is so timely because, I don't know about you, but to me, and I sound like such an old person here, but like the pace of change is rapidly accelerating. But seriously, that's how I feel. It's like, I just don't see, even in my own business, the same things working today that they did last year. And instead of being like, oh, there's something wrong or I'm failing, it's like actually looking at what has changed and how can I adapt how I'm doing things to meet that change for the better, so that not only I'm in a better position, but I'm actually serving and contributing at a more impactful level. So I think it's a really interesting conversation for everybody because, whether, as you said, change happens to you or you consciously go out and create that change, pivoting and adapting and evolving in entrepreneurship is kind of a non-negotiable. And so when we can learn how to do that with ease and grace and actually have it feel expansive versus something that we have to do or figure out, I think there's a lot of power in that as a skill set as an entrepreneur. So I'd be curious, and if you're open, for you to kind of like spill the tea a little bit on your pivot over the last year, because it's been a big one. And also it's been really successful. So I think it'd be inspiring for people to hear your experience with pivoting and where you are now because of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to talk about this topic because it is so present for me, and I think it's a conversation that can sometimes get a bit overshadowed in the land of entrepreneurship as we're talking about niching and doubling down. And it's like, well, what happens when things aren't working? What happens when things aren't going the way we planned? And I know for sure for me, that was a question I was asking myself as I was coming up to like the 2.5 year mark in my business. My coach training had very much trained me to be out in the world as a very general, broad coach. And so for years, not that I wasn't supporting people in their careers, but in the market as an entrepreneur, I was branding myself as a life and mindset coach. And there's the whole aspect of product market fit, and do people understand who you're serving, how you're serving them? And I always felt like there's this niggling thing of like, I don't know if I'm getting it. I don't know if, my ideal client is really getting it. It feels really hard to be able to be clear in my messaging and what I'm trying to say. And I think that all and not for a lack of grit, not for a lack of trying, and not for a lack of engagement. But I was really like, I don't want to be a statistic. I don't want to be, that after the first year, after the second year, after the third year. But 2.5 years in, I really felt the pressure of that. And I ended up finding myself at a rock bottom in my business where, sure, there was, some great, or not great, but there was some financial metrics the year before where I was like, okay, it seems like it could keep going. But what I was seeing under the surface, under the hood in my business was, it felt like it was dying. I had, big financial commitments coming up. I have a mortgage, things were popping up. And at the same time, I was getting to this place where I'm like, I don't have any clients booked next month. And I don't know if I feel like I know or really back myself in getting clients. And so I hit this financial, emotional, mental rock bottom around 2.5 years. But at the same time, it ended up being the best thing for me in my business, because instead of letting it kind of take me out of the game, I saw it as this moment. I remember us having a conversation and you saying, this can also be an opportunity to really make a commitment with yourself and say, I will never find myself here ever again. And I fully embraced that. That really shifted things for me. And now looking back, it allowed me to have this phoenix rising from the ashes moment. And I really saw it as my ego burning down of what I thought I should do, how I thought I should create a business. I'd kind of, you learn from all these people around you, business coaches, LinkedIn society, of what you should do and how you should show up. And it was like, okay, actually, let's burn it all to the ground. Let's start from the basics. And that's why I was so happy we were working together, because it was like, okay, let's start with the client. Let's start with the market. What do my clients need? What am I uniquely positioned to help them with? And that was so hard, so incredibly hard to like let what I thought, my whole business was go at the time. But it was also so liberating and so fun to almost have this blank slate energy of like, going to recreate myself, even if how I coached didn't actually change a ton. Like I was still leveraging my experience as a coach.
Yeah. Oh, I like had so many like just moments where I'm like cheering you on in that story, getting goosebumps. Like it's so beautiful to hear. And the cool thing about it is like once you made that commitment to make it about your client, not you, and allow yourself to have an ego death in a way around who you thought you were, your identity around who you were in business, all of those things. The actual like shift didn't take that long. Like it's for you to actually see, like it feels like such a huge thing. Oh my God, 2.5 years of like work, I'm going to burn it to the ground. How long is it going to take me to like build it back up? And it actually didn't take very long once you committed. Like how long did it take until you started to see signals that it was the right move and you were going to be okay?
I think it was a couple months.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love how sometimes we can be in the right place at the right time with the right people. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember this whole thing was happening when I was in Barbados, of
I
all
remember
places.
that.
So the duality was incredible. I'm on this incredible vacation with amazing friends in Barbados. And at the same time, I am in this like state of chaos and emotional distress about where my business is at. And I was just so lucky at the time. My friend had kind of reflected back to me, like you have this whole background and experience in STEM. Like, why are you not, really doubling down in terms of who you actually are uniquely positioned to serve? And sometimes people can reflect things back to you and it falls off your shoulders. You're like, that doesn't resonate. Um, but when she shared that, something clicked and I was like, oh, thank you for reflecting that back to me. I actually couldn't see that myself. But when I really doubled down, I found the truth in it for me. And also noticing actually, these are the people I am absolutely best positioned to serve. And I'm so excited and passionate about serving in a really deep way. So it started to click pretty immediately. And I really had never had that feeling in my business before of like, the only term I have for it is product market fit. I'm sure maybe there's another way of talking about it of like, ooh, like it's clicking and there's sparks and there's momentum and
It
I
doesn't
wasn't
feel so
taking
hard.
exactly. And I wasn't taking anything for granted. I was like,
Mm.
I'm very much here to even, pivot and adapt and improve as we go
Yeah.
based on what my clients need.
Yeah. Ah, so good. So maybe we can transition into, you've kind of touched on this a little bit. And I think, it's one thing to hear a story like this and be inspired. And then it's another to understand how to do it for yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
for people who might be experiencing some feelings of stuckness or hitting rock bottom or feeling like where they're going isn't really for them anymore, I would love to break the rest of this show down into two parts. One is, why do you think it's so hard for people to make the pivot? Like, from your experience personally, but also working with clients now on similar things, what are the things that get in the way of making the pivot? And then we can transition into like how to do that once you're in it with some ease. So you're already touching on this through your story, but let's just really get focused on those two pieces so that this can be a really some tangible takeaways for people listening to the show.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
So yeah. So could you start with like why you think it's so difficult for people to let go of what they've been doing and make that intentional change in direction?
Mm-hmm. When I was reflecting on this for myself and what I see in my practice, I think a few themes came up for me. And one, I mean, how could we, not talk about change? How can we talk about change and not talk about fear? And I think anytime we are confronted with something new, uncharted territory, it's so natural. I know for me, for fear to come up, fear of so many things, fear of failure, fear of what if I make the wrong choice and I waste my time and my energy. Um, and and then it's like, how do we respond to fear and how do we interpret fear? I know that's so much of the work that you talk about is like, how do we actually interpret it and not just take it as oh, just put your foot on the gas or put your foot on the brake. Um, and I also know for me, like I had an attachment to the identity I created, and my ego was very invested in what I thought, should work. And so there's this attachment, and then I don't know what I don't know. And so it took my friend reflecting back to me this potential other avenue. It took, you reflecting back to me other avenues to be like, oh, I'm actually already doing that. Just as a business, I'm not honing in on that in my marketing and my sales. And what if I took that as an experiment? And so I think for me, if I thought about, oh my goodness, this is going to be this like end all be all, this is the thing, this is the silver bullet that's going to make my business successful. I feel like that can kind of hold us back. And maybe a label for that is around the perfectionism. And then for me to actually be like, actually, it's just a 1 month experiment. We're just going to experiment for 1 month. And then we're going to take it a day at a time or a month at a time.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Because I think, what's interesting about your story, and I think this happens a lot for people in terms of the pivots, is we don't have to wait until we get to that rock bottom moment. But a lot of people do, because then the fear, like, well, I've got nothing to lose right at that point. So it's like,
Yes.
right.
Yes.
So the fear dissipates when we've got nothing perceived to lose. And so I think that that's super interesting that you bring that part up. And then, like, how to apply it without getting to the rock bottom place is this idea of experimentation. And I love I'm always encouraging people to work with experiments, because it quiets that part of our brain that doesn't like change. And so instead of seeing it as something permanent, it's this ability to play with change and be like, okay, let's go all in on this for 30 days. Let's go all in on this for 90 days and see what happens. So I think that that's a really tangible, great takeaway for people, is this experiment idea. And I'd love for you to speak a little bit more to the identity piece, because I know that that's huge. And so, the idea of an ego death can sound kind of scary. And our ego will grip to it and think of all the reasons why we shouldn't do it. So what allowed you, and what do you see allows other people, if there's examples, to transition and evolve the identity piece?
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like if I reflect back on my biggest changes, where really my identity came into it, there absolutely is the rock bottom element. So, for me, at least in my lived experience, because to your point, like, there's this moment, and I remember reading The Alchemist, and it's like there's this dark night of the soul before you can see the light. And it has taken me getting to my knees, literally. Like, I remember being in France, we were living in Europe. Again, $0 in my bank account. How was I going to make money next month? And literally on my knees, bawling my eyes out in the living room and being like, universe, like, what am I meant to learn from this? Like, what do you need from me? Like, and so in that way, I felt like it was just this natural, there's no other way. And I remember learning about some of the science behind behavior change. And it's like, we don't actually want to change. We often don't want to change and go another way, but it's when the way we've been going is no longer feasible. It's no longer tenable. And so for me, I felt, I don't know, like, I remember in COVID hearing this idea of necessity is the mother of innovation. And I don't know how to speak about the identity piece without speaking to this internal feeling of necessity. Like, I cannot go on any longer this way. And so I don't know if that resonates, but for me, it's like, it really felt like I couldn't go on any other way, and rebirth was the only option.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And so again, it kind of comes to that, like, crossroads where it's like the road runs out. Like, your current way of operating, or who you're being, or how you see yourself in the world just doesn't work anymore. And again, this doesn't have to always be like a like thing where we're like, we have to do it or it's rock bottom. It could simply be like these, like, and I'm just going to use like random examples because it's the beginning of the year. And so everyone has their like New Year's resolutions that they're working on and habits, but it's like how you see yourself. So if you want to start waking up earlier in the mornings, it's like you need to start seeing yourself as a morning person. Like, I am a morning person, and look for evidence that you actually are. Because if we just try to layer on behavior, then it becomes hard. But as you start to see yourself differently, and I think in your story, the thing that probably allowed you, if I'm guessing, to make the pivot quite easily is your friend's reflection, being like, this is who you are. Like, you have all this experience, you have this like deep rooted wisdom that you can apply this way. So you already probably, I'm guessing, saw yourself as someone that could help there.
Yeah. I think you used the perfect words for it. Now that you say that, it's like, yeah, absolutely. Not that, my headline was career coach, but I absolutely was coaching people in their careers to make transitions. And I absolutely am a woman in tech. I've been serving women in tech. So to then just make this shift to put it in my headline in my mind, I am a career coach for women in tech. And then to put it, in all the online spaces, you're right. It was reflected back to me and I felt the truth in it. And so it felt very easeful to see myself that way, to then have my business be a vehicle in that direction.
Yeah, totally. And sometimes I know I've had this experience. I was just masterminding with a friend in last December, in the December, and she reflected something back to me about, the work that I've done and how I help people. And it takes sometimes someone reflecting it. It's like hard. It's like the water that we swim in, and we don't often see these things for ourselves. So I think that that's another like really interesting thing as people are thinking about pivoting, is actually like using your network, your family, your friends, going back to say old testimonials or case studies, like what people have said about working with you, doing like a timeline on your experience, because we often come from lots of different things in terms of what we've done. And it could be like a job like 4 jobs ago that actually you're like, oh, I could pull some of that in. I like off when I started doing retreats, I was like, oh, I can kill retreats because I grew up in the restaurant industry, and like attention to detail and like creating experiences was like drilled into us. Like that was like the main thing. And so I'm like, oh, I'm just doing that in a different format. I can totally do this. So I think when we look for those like breadcrumbs, we can often see that there's a lot of experiences that we can pull forward that can help us see ourselves in the new positioning, whatever that might look like. Yeah. So, one last question I have for you before we kind of move on from this topic is, it kind of goes along with what we were just talking about, is how do you, when people are pivoting, when you're like working with clients and they're thinking about going to a new job or maybe even changing industries, I don't know, how do you support them in not seeing it as, I'm going to lose all of the experience and built up credibility I have, or whatever it is, all of the equity is the word I'm looking for, all of the equity I've built up in this space. How do you support them in seeing that they're not losing anything, but there's actually more to be gained?
Mm. Yeah, for me, there's the balance of the strategy and the mindset. And so strategically, we work on finding highly aligned opportunities where their experience and their background and their skills are exactly what, that next opportunity is looking for and that they're wanting. And so we're actually positioning and putting them in this position of strength, that no, you're not starting over. You're not starting from scratch. There are companies and sectors out there. I was just working with a client who transitioned from academia and the world of physics into quantum computing, machine learning, and AI. And I don't know a lot about either of those worlds, but to come from this place of like, well, what companies, what areas actually value exactly what you have to offer today? So there's that strategic piece of alignment, but then there's the mindset piece of, I think when we can come from this place of how can I use every experience in my life and in my career to learn and grow? And this is for me a core tenet that I live by in my own practice as an entrepreneur and in my, path in my career. Then we can see everything as a stepping stone towards where we are meant to be, where the direction we're meant to be going. And I think that's an incredibly empowering stance to take.
Yeah, totally. I 100% agree with you in terms of like everything is a stepping stone in some way, or a contributing piece of the puzzle in some way. Sometimes it can be like lateral moves or whatever, but totally. I think that's really helpful. And so, do you have any processes that you recommend people work with to be able to see what is maybe that next fit? Or, if they're like, okay, I know I need to make a pivot, but I don't know what, how do you recommend people take that next step?
Well, I like to start by kind of taking a step back from the strategic and laying a strong foundation. And so I'm all about, what is your inner guidance system? What's your inner GPS first? And then we kind of move into doing that strategic work of identifying aligned opportunities. So in terms of if someone was thinking about making a big career transition, I would say start with reflecting on, what you want, what's important to you, what are your values. 10 years from now, 5 years from now, what's your vision for your career? And when we can start from that solid place inside and that really clear vision, then I feel like everything can come into alignment with that inner knowing. And then we never have to be afraid that we're taking a step in the wrong direction, because we know we're filtering it through this inner system, this inner guidance that we know is true to us and our intuition.
I love that. And it's kind of like when the clarity is there around that, then the opportunities, the like things that are a match for that tend to show up because we're actually available for them. So I think that's a really great place to start. Like, what do you actually want? How do you want your workday to look? What kind of clients do you want to work with? What kind of job do you want? Things that how do you want your life to look? And then be able to match from there. So good. Thank you so much for sharing your story, first of all, and then also just your really grounded, practical advice for people who are thinking about pivoting or find themselves in a pivot. Because as I said at the top of the show, I just think that it's a non-negotiable skill set for an entrepreneur to be able to pivot and to adapt. So I think this conversation is going to be really useful to a lot of people. And before we wrap, though, I'd love to get your answer to the question that we ask all guests on the show. What is your definition of being a soulful CEO?
Even after 3 years, I don't know if I have one clear definition yet. But if I just take a moment to tune in, there's something for me about Mondays. It's like, to be a soulful CEO means that I never have those Monday scaries anymore, because I know that every day there's an equal opportunity to be able to show up in the world and use my life and my business as a vehicle to express, my purpose and my essence, and that every part of my life gets its piece. Like, every piece of the puzzle gets me a whole kind of chunk of me. So, the time and the engagement and the presence to take care of my puppy and to fully enjoy her. And then to totally be engaged with my business, totally be engaged with my relationships. And then, of course, and while each piece gets, its time and its energy, that there is the financial piece. Like, the financial piece is also working.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that vision, and that you're living it too, which is so cool. That's not just an idea. It's like, that is your life. That's your life.
I like to start from the attainable. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
no, I can start from like no Monday scaries.
Yeah, so good. Well, thank you again for being here with us, Emily. And thank you so much to everyone who listened into this episode with us. If you love this episode, please hit that follow and subscribe button and consider leaving this episode a review. It really does do wonders for the show, so more people can benefit from conversations like these. And I'll link all of Emily's information in the show notes so you can connect with her on social and on her website so you can learn more about her. And as always, if you have any questions or want to reach out to me, I'm at Kristin Constable on Instagram. And if you'd like to make a guest request, please share that. I always like to hear them. So thanks for joining us, and I'll see you in the next episode.